This is the CW Spiral, a podcast run by three survivors of the CW's calling in 2022. We're your hosts, Sabrina Reed,
Michael Patterson,
and Reed Gowdens.
bringing you history about the network and the WB, the latest news and in-depth Sporterville discussions of the best and messiest shows to ever grace the small screen. Hey everyone! As we had previewed in our last episode, we are going to be talking about the end of superhero TV. I feel like we've had this conversation in fits and starts since it became very clear that the superhero genre was leaving broadcast. But since the nail is at this point nearly all the way in the coffin, we might as well have an extended conversation about it as millennials. Michael and I have been watching superhero television since we can remember.
yeah,
Like, that's how long it's been on broadcast or public access television, and then on network TV.
it's been quite the journey. I mean, like, I remember, obviously, we talk about the Arrowverse being a big part of this, and it was. We wouldn't even be in this era if it weren't for them. But there has been superheroes have been on and off broadcast TV for a half a century. It's only now that we managed to make it work long term. Of course, like obviously, I grew up with Smallville on. I didn't really watch it until my teenage years, but I grew up with Smallville on. Birds of Prey was on in 2002. But like, as far as superheroes on broadcast TV goes, like we're going all the way back to like the 50s and the 60s. Like the 1966 Batman series aired on ABC for 3 seasons. A decade later, Wonder Woman aired on ABC for 1 season, then moved over to CBS for two more. Um, and like that was considered the peak of superhero TV in its heyday. And even when I was growing up, people looked back and thought, remember when superheroes were on TV? And I always grew up watching like animated shows and tell I'm a big TV fan. Like you don't need to watch this podcast for more than 4 minutes to know that I love television. And I remember as a kid thinking, yeah, I love the movies, but why don't we do this on television? Because then we can have both an adventure of the week and a long-term storyline. I didn't understand budgets, restrictions, and all that ratings were important and all of that back then. But like little did I know that in 2012 a new superhero TV era would begin with the Arrowverse and a shared universe. Launched more shows and like the we're coming towards the end of broadcast superhero television, at least for this generation, at least for this era. And you can't help but look back on where it all began because yes, we have an era of it for this past decade, but it's been on and off for decades. Who knows? Maybe we'll be go back to it being on and off for decades to come. But the it can't help but feel like a turning point now that when we're moving into this era where superhero TV shows are becoming such a commodity. Look at Marvel, look at The Boys, look at DC's streaming shows. The television, the original idea of television, the final superhero show on broadcast television and Superman at Lois could very well, 2024 could very well bring about an end to that era. And you can't help but feel bittersweet about it.
I know. I think it is because, like, regardless of whether it was live action or it was animated, there's just, I think you speak a lot of people to people about their childhood. It's the Saturday morning cartoons, right?
Yeah.
You're watching some version of Batman in the morning. Like there's Static Shock. There's there was I don't remember where the animated Superman played, but there was that too.
Hmm.
You could catch that. Of course, cable had the animated shows too, whether it was, Justice League, Justice League Unlimited. Again, another version of Batman of some kind, Batman
Yeah.
Beyond, uh, Teen Titans. There's just Young Justice. There's just so many superhero shows you could watch on like broadcast and cable. It became like a conversation a lot, like on the playground. Like,
Yeah.
and whether or not you were currently watching or you watched in the past, you were aware of these superheroes. And so it just feels weird that, that era, even though cable's kind of leaving, like as far as uh versions that are appropriate for young children or young adults.
Hmm.
Like there's always like whenever, we start scaling towards more mature material, we leave the kids without a lot. And that seems to be what's happening. Like the CW's superhero shows were for the most part family friendly.
Yeah.
Like they had their moments. They were TV 14, but for the most part, they were the type of shows that you could watch as a family if you wanted to. It's not like that Verizon commercial where they used to sell you on getting a subscription and it would give you they'd give you whatever amount of months free for HBO. Then the whole family would come into the living room and they would be watching Game of Thrones, which made no sense to me because they were like the 14-year-old and 16-year-old coming to, and I was like, in what household?
Right.
But like there is just something to say about, the ways in which superheroes have always been in the background in some capacity. Like, I mean, that's the whole reason why the Marvel movies worked, is because it's not that we didn't have a dearth of superhero content. People have been living with superheroes most of their lives. So yeah, I'll go see. I don't know who these ones are, but yeah, I'll go see this Marvel movie,
Yeah.
you know. And so now it's all big and fancy, and the budgets are astronomical to the point that Bob Iger was like, calm down over there.
Yeah.
Like, and then, and it's unfortunate because I think in some ways it's removed the playfulness of the genre, like, and the practicality of the genre and the make-believe, if that makes
Hmm.
sense. I think one of the what made me so drawn to superheroes as a child and then into my teens and later into my adulthood was the practicality of the way they would achieve showing them be super. And
Yeah.
you just went with it because it's kind of the same makeshift things you would do on the playground, but obviously a bigger budget. Like that's just a fan moving that cape. They are on wires, and sometimes you can kind of tell where the wire was hanging. But you went with it because it's not asking you to immerse yourself so deeply that you can't see the smoke and mirrors. It's to
Yeah.
immerse yourself in the fantasy of it all. And I think that's what I enjoy about the earlier superhero shows. It's also what I enjoy about the CW ones. Like Superman and Lois is a little different because they had more budget than everybody else, but they're asking you to believe. And I think the show's no longer being on broadcast. It's a disservice to our imagination. And someone's gonna be like, Sabrina, there are like other shows that you can watch on broadcast that capture your imagination. It's like there are, but for the most part, it's procedurals and first responder dramas.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, like so, there we are actually going to be experiencing a loss in broadcast with the superhero genre leaving after Superman and Lois.
It does. It truly feels like the end of an era because the reason I always thought that superheroes worked so well on TV was because at the end of the day, you pick up a comic book, the superhero is fighting that villain, you pick up the next issue, he's fighting a different villain, and so forth. The episodic format of television allowed it to bring that to life. And don't get me wrong, more often than not, it probably worked better on the animated medium because you ask less questions about animated shows, whereas like on the live action shows, it's like, oh, the family drama is getting in the way, or oh, the romance drama is getting in the way, or whatever. But the idea that you could have an overarching story versus villains of the week as well and make it all pay off. Like there's no better example of that than The Flash season one. That did it so, so well. And like I think that is doing what modern procedural shows do, like on 911 or whatever, or Grey's Anatomy. There's definitely episodic cases of the week, but at the same time, there's also an overarching storyline. And I think that's why that format lends itself to the superhero genre so well. So it's a bit troubling that we're bowing out of that era because don't get me wrong, I love my big budget streaming shows, but at the same time, they're trying to reinvent the genre so much that I feel like they've kind of overdone it in the last 4 years since these streaming shows have come along. Like we've got The Penguin coming up, it's going to be like a mafia drama like The Sopranos, brilliant. We haven't done that before in the superhero genre. Meanwhile, we've got like look at The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. That was basically just a six-part movie. So why couldn't it have been a movie? Secret Invasion, six-part movie. Why couldn't it have been a movie? Also, Secret Invasion had a budget of $200 million, like it was any Marvel movie. Ain't no TV show needs a budget of $200 million. That's not necessary. Um, Whereas, like we mentioned, look at what Superman and Lois is doing. Episodic adventure, sure, but also an overarching storyline. Huge budget compared to some of the other TV shows, but at the same time, it's still a television budget with the same set, with the same characters that we use on rotation, and yet it pulled it off so well. And it's sad. It is just feel like we're moving out of the genre in all aspects. You mentioned animated shows. You're right. We grew up watching these shows on television, but like even if the animated shows are graduating to adult content, mature content, that's not the only issue here. It's also that they're graduating. Because of that, they're graduating to streaming services. Like, obviously, we all watched Batman the Animated Series when we were younger, and that started the DCAU with the sequel series is like Superman existed in the same universe, the Justice League shows existed in the same universe. Batman Beyond was set 30 years in the future, it existed in the same universe. Static Shock retroactively was inserted into that universe because he crossed over with Batman a few times. Also existed in that same universe. Look at what those shows accomplished, and whether they were on cable networks or broadcast networks, like you were going to catch reruns on Cartoon Network or Toonami, it doesn't matter. Whereas now you look at a show like Batman Cape Crusader that just dropped, part of the same creative team as the animated series, but it's on Amazon Prime Video. You ain't no kid flicking on Amazon Prime Video to watch that show. That's not the way it can be done anymore. Broadcast TV had its uses back then, and certainly it had a lot more uses, but it still has its uses today. So it should be a reflection of everything. And I know superheroes had it good for a decade, but it's sad to think that we're about to bow out of that era because you're right, it's not just live action shows. There's the superhero genre continues to be the most popular in the world, and yet it feels like the most easily accessible products in that world are now no longer going to be easily accessible because you have to be on a streaming service, you have to be of a certain age. And if we're alienating one of the biggest audiences, two of the biggest audiences, A, the general public who just watch television, and B, the kids who love their corny, light-hearted, fun, cheery superheroes, what are we still doing this for?
It's a question because I think there needs to be a middle ground of how you transition through your superheroes, and I feel like we had that. Like obviously we
Yeah.
did not have the Disney Junior version or the Cartoonito version of the Marvel or DC heroes. Like I do
Hmm.
wonder about like the babies who watch the Spider Crew on Disney Channel. And I'm not sure if the DC Super Friends, where for some reason Harley Quinn is a good guy,
Yeah.
is still necessarily airing. It might be that the programming on Cartoon Network is all over the place. So I have no idea. But they also have Bat Wheels with talking
Yeah.
cars. Like so like it's and that's so adorable. And but I'm also like, where are the kids going after that though? Like once
Right.
we get into our older years, before we're heading into our adolescence, what are those kids watching? I mean, granted, they are like digital natives. I think that's the term. So they could be on the streaming sites using the search bar. Like, I like Batman. What other Batman content can I watch? Like, they could definitely be doing that. But there's just something about being like appointment television cartoons. Like, I know
Hmm.
it's going to be on this day at this time, and everybody move out the way. I have the TV. I'm watching it. I do. I kind of not worried about this next generation of superhero fans because if you're into it, you're into it. And if you can't find anything, you just, keep looking. I mean, when they get to the period where they kind of didn't have any of the either I watched all the animated shows or like for instance, I was really into X-Men and X-Men animated series was no longer airing. I would just like beg my mom to buy me the comics whenever you
Yeah.
were like, and you then when you're a child, you don't need to read anything in order or have context. So there is that. But I just do wish they weren't going to miss out, and they are, as far as growing their knowledge. I feel sometimes though, having this discussion, like I feel a little crotchety, like a little like old about it. And I think it's just because my main thought is because we rely too heavily on computers, we are moving things away from being more accessible because we're in love with computer animation that's expensive. We're in love with CGI. We're in love with making things look more and more realistic. And TV doesn't do that. TV has no interest, but by this I mean broadcast TV, has no interest in being uncanny. There's
Hmm.
just they don't have the budgets for it. There's too much story to be told. You say that for movies, but streaming can do that because they are like, oh, we'll just put out, like you said, 6-part movies, and we'll call it a TV show. And you can really tell the difference between a TV show, a superhero TV show that's meant to be a superhero TV show, in a superhero show that is just a movie cut up into 6 hours, like 6 hour
Hmm.
episodes. Like WandaVision is a television show. Moon Knight is a
Yes.
television show. Like
Yes.
I'd argue Loki is a television show. But
Yeah.
like you said, Falcon and the Winter Soldier is not.
No.
That's a movie. Like it really felt like it. I didn't finish it, but it really did feel like you would be waiting week to week for the next part of the film. And that, as a viewer, is aggravating.
It is. And I do think Marvel's starting to realize that because Echo, for example, which was only 5 episodes, that partially felt like a movie, but it also had episodic structure to it. But even regardless of that, they dropped it all at once like a binge watch, which means you could watch one episode into the other. So it got to flow like a movie. That's where the streaming format works really, really well. They weren't going to release that as a movie, and I do understand that. So have people binge it instead. And it worked so well. I'm feeling like I feel like that would have benefited shows like The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but even more so Secret Invasion, because when Secret Invasion's first episode dropped, it got good reviews, but also questionable reviews for some of the creative choices it made. But they thought, oh, here we have like a British espionage-esque thriller. As a Marvel show, that could really work, but the drop in the episodes weekly when you were just getting another installment of the movie, people got fed up, people got bored, and then it ended in a typical CGI fight, just like any other Marvel movie. And I'm like, why were we building up this like slow moving thriller just to do this? Um, so that's where the weekly format worked against that. It also just wasn't really great, sorry. Whereas television shows can bounce back from a bad episode, it can bounce back from a bad season, but these 6 hour movies, you drop it weekly. Everyone remembers which episode was what. When they're watching it, 6 weeks later, people can't remember what happened in each episode. They just remember the whole thing together. And their last memory is that last episode, whether it was good or bad. Um, Whereas, like I said, a TV show can bounce back from a bad season. Like, honestly, I hate to say it more often than not, it tends not to. But there are generally a lot of times it can. Um, TV was fun. TV never tried to reinvent the wheel, but by not doing so, it kind of did sometimes. Whereas now everybody just wants to be a 6 part movie and like highbrow. And there is something to that because like nobody takes a network TV show seriously anymore, especially if it's goofy and lighthearted, but people want to take like a 6 hour movie on television seriously with big budget and everything. But that doesn't change the fact that that might be high quality in so many areas. But if it struggles at its fundamental of being a TV show, it's not a better TV show than the corny, fun 22 episode season that knew exactly what it was and pulled off decent filler episodes as well as a great overarching narrative. Like I love these Marvel shows so much, but half of them would not hold up against The Flash season one, which is one of the best examples of superhero television, in my opinion, ever on TV. Um, and it won't, they certainly wouldn't hold up against the high quality of Superman and Lois. In fact, 3/4 of the Marvel shows, in my opinion, wouldn't hold up against Superman and Lois. And a lot of these big budget, high quality, Emmy nominated streaming shows also wouldn't, just because that show understands its audience better. Um, so that's my hot take. But generally, I just feel like it's sad. I'm glad Superman always gets to be the one that helps it buy out. But at the same time, it's even after 12 years into this like full-time superhero era. And let's be honest, if you want to count Smallville, 24 years into this era, it feels sad. It still feels a bit premature that we're ending it, considering how popular superheroes are around the world.
Yeah, and I think it also is because the besides the fact that, like you said, it's been 24 years, but the medium is so different now. And the medium is so different now because of streaming. And so when we're like saying like the end of superhero TV, in some ways it's the end of superhero TV as we know it as well. I have obviously the Marvel shows, whether they were the Netflix originals or they're now the Disney Plus originals, are shows. Some of them, like we said, 6 part movies. But like especially the Netflix ones are television, right? We're
Yeah.
talking, it's not someone or a team, I should say, putting together different um putting together this whole movie and chopping it up. Like you couldn't do that. You can't do that in TV. There are TV movies, but they are, going in, they are movies, and you will see part two next week. They like
Yeah.
they don't do them as much anymore actually than the way that they used to. Where you could do a six-part TV movie and you knew it was a movie and you sat there and you were fine with it. Um,
Hmm.
Streaming asks you to pretend that it's not a movie.
Yeah.
Streaming asks you to, if it's not a binge, to invest like it is a week-to-week television show with the usual, first act, second act, third act, a progression of the story. And it's aggravating because if you follow television, you know that that's not how they're doing certain things isn't doesn't work because it's what you're doing is film. I think that with Superman and Lois being the last one, it's great that is the example of how to best do a superhero family drama or just a superhero drama in general. I know we always give it high praise, but this is also a CW podcast, so it's the one that we talk about the most. But I feel like out of all the shows that have been on television, it has taken the mix of genre and done it better than anything else. Like it
Hmm.
is I think all the superhero shows that we had seen, with exception to maybe Smallville, because Smallville is a superhero show, but it is a coming of age drama for like half of its run before we get into Clark becoming an adult and navigating that world. And that's when I think the show leans more into being about what it means to be a superhero than when it
Hmm.
previously started, where it's more about what it means to be a teenage boy with powers in a town where no one else has them.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. I have to say that it's pretty ironic that we're ending with Superman and Lois because it successfully took a genre of television, which is family drama, and spun it into a superhero show. And in many ways, this current chapter of the superhero TV era started with Smallville. And the only reason that show was successful was because it took a successful television format, the teen drama, and spun it into a superhero show. Smallville existed at a time when superheroes were not popular on TV. It's one of its kind. We saw Birds of Prey rise up and fall very quickly during that era because it tried to be straightforward superhero TV. Smallville existed so well because it masqueraded as both a teen drama and a family drama for those first 5 seasons. And then once it had people hooked, then once it had people invested, from season 6 onwards, it spun and completely changed back into a straightforward superhero drama. And in many ways, it did reinvent the wheel because it showed you that superhero dramas, like there's an episode in season 6 where they practically form a mini Justice League. And it still had time for romance drama. It still had time for Clark's love life. And it showed you that that was the benefits of superhero TV in this modern era. And I truly believe that without Smallville, we wouldn't have had the Arrowverse or anything like that because all of those shows took those lessons, but they were afforded the opportunity to be straightforward superhero shows. Smallville wasn't afforded that opportunity, and thus it changed the game. It spun itself into what was working at the time, which is why a superhero show like Smallville is still considered among the greatest teen and family dramas of that era, among the likes of The OC and One Tree Hill and Dawson's Creek. Smallville succeeded and was one of them, while also being a superhero show, paving the way for more superhero shows to come. So it is pretty ironic, not just the fact that both are Superman shows, but it is pretty ironic that now we're ending that era with another show that has successfully spun itself into a different genre because everyone said Superman and Lois is like family Friday Night Lights with superheroes. And I mean, like, you won't find a better example of, or a better way to sum it up than that, because it is at its heart a family drama. The lead character just so happens to be a superhero at the same time.
Yeah, I think what does Bitsy call it? Friday Night Tights.
Yeah, I
Yes,
love that. I love that so much.
it's such a great phrase, and it's so true because it is exactly that. And I think this is about to get off a little off topic, but looking at the history of the superhero television, it's so interesting to see like the different genres, where you have the more hammy, um, um, like your website, Bam Smack Pow, like
Name
moments
drop.
of the earlier Batman shows and Wonder Woman, and then I think it's the Adventures of Superman and Lois, right? And
Yeah.
that's the one that I grew up with before Smallville. Again, comedy. It's a rom-com. And it's just so, it's just, and it fits because it's the 90s, so the rom-coms were huge.
Hmm.
And so it works, but it is also sort of like screwball in a way. And it didn't take itself too seriously. And Smallville, in some capacity, was like that as well. I think now we've sort of entered the age of the comic superheroes, like where we want to delve into the stories and put them on screen, and really like delve into the meat of some of the things that have been in the pages of comics, which I think that's really cool. But I also think in doing that, we are straying towards a more conceptual at times, cerebral at times version of superheroes, which is fine, but you also lose the lightheartedness. It also becomes this, because it's so popular and people want their favorite genres to be respected, then now everything has to be art.
Yeah.
Everything has to have some type of deep social commentary, regardless of what it is. And I think there's room for that, but I also think there is this tendency because you want it to be legitimate that anything that is considered to be, not expensive, not leaning fully into, superheroes as the heroes, in a way that is unquestionable, even if they're complex and complicated. Uh, that gets looked down upon. Like if it's not prestige superhero TV, people don't want it. And I'm like, but why? I like prestige superhero TV too, but it's comics. Like it's like they are you have your gritty ones and you have your lighthearted versions of the characters, and they can all exist in the same world. And to me, that's what the broadcast element embodied. That streaming could be your prestige. We're really going through it. Tragic, heartbreaking, yes, superhero content, and then your broadcast shows could be their lighthearted cousin,
Yeah.
their fun sibling. And the fact that we're not going to get that balance is a little, it's heart-wrenching. Like I'm sad about it. Like even with Agatha All Along, which is going to be fun, there are elements of it from seeing the trailer that you can tell we're playing and mixing with genre in a way that
Hmm.
you can't necessarily do on broadcast. So it'll be lighthearted, but it'll be lighthearted in the way that most likely that WandaVision was, right? Like WandaVision is regardless of how people might feel about it, critically, it is an impeccable piece of television. It is an incredibly smart piece of television that has something to say. And I feel like Agatha All Along will too. Maybe in a more fun way, but still have something to say in a more camp way too.
Oh yeah.
Uh, but I kind of am going to miss, not that I kind of hope that if we're removing some of the storytelling from broadcast, that we'll see it appear in streaming. That
Mm.
someone will make a show that feels like a broadcast superhero show. That like it does it that it's looser, it's funnier. It's like we have big tragic moments, but there's just something about it that feels wholesome. Like The Flash is a tragedy.
Yeah.
And yet, it like for the first three seasons, it's straight through a tragedy. And yet, there's something so lighthearted and wholesome about it that you forget about that fact.
Yeah. It's a family show at the beginning. Like it stays a family show at the end, but it really turns into a kind of like cheesy, straightforward superhero show, and it's like it's that's not what it was originally envisioned as. It was a high quality, beautiful, moving family drama that you could literally watch with the whole family. But like you said, there was a lot of tragedy in there too, and like much like we talked about Nancy Drew in the previous episode, the show was also about overcoming tragedy and overcoming grief and pulling yourself out of it and being your own hero. And you don't see those kind of uplifting stories in streaming anymore. It's just there was always a divide between movie and television. And now we're starting to see those higher quality movie-esque storylines on TV, but via streaming shows. And that's removing the original idea of what television was. And I don't really like that. Yeah, it's you mentioned WandaVision, like that is one of my favorite TV shows of all time, and I think that was a genius show for Marvel to start with. They were originally supposed to begin with the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but because of the pandemic shutdowns or whatever, they had to swap the shows around. And I'm really glad they did swap the shows around because that showed you what Marvel could do with television. It was a TV show. It was also a mix and a celebration of what television was. I think that was an impeccable way to start its television era. Whereas The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, as compelling as it was just a 6 hour movie. Um, and that's not original. That's just, oh, right, well, then why couldn't this have been a movie? Um, so I think WandaVision was a great one to start with. Uh, Speaking of like mixing genres up and trying different things, that's why Gotham Knights could never have worked in this era because you're right, people want higher quality, comic accurate storylines. While that they're a huge part of that is a huge part, that's a huge part of it, and a lot of shows in today's day and age are successful for that reason. This era started with the oddest, most unique, random takes on superhero shows. Like Smallville wasn't comic accurate by any stretch of the imagination. We had the Justice League formed before Superman showed up. Like, how did that happen? Um, so yeah, Superman's supposed to be one of the world's first superheroes, and yet you had Black Canary, Green Arrow, and all these other heroes established before he was. Um, and yet Smallville is beloved because of the era it arrived from. I do think Gotham Knights would have been more successful had it aired during that era because it was the teen drama mixed with the super. It's pretty ironic that we tried that one more time before the show came to an end, but it was too polarizing for people. Like its ratings were solid, all things considered. Everyone thought it was really going to be really poorly viewed, but it wasn't. Um, and I was highly critical of the pilot because of how violent it was. That's a problem. Even the CW started being a bit like violent and dark and grim and moody, and we had to be DC broody, all of that. We didn't need all of that. But the longer that show went on, the more I loved it. Because it was unique, it was original, it was different, and it was perfectly fitted both the conventions of the genre and the network it was on, which is something you don't see now anymore. Every network and streaming service is trying everything and thus kind of losing their own identity. Whereas, yes, the CW had established itself as a superhero network, so any superhero show was never going to be out of place on it. But we got to buy this era out with one more of those teen drama superhero shows because at the end of the day, the CW was a teen drama network to begin with. So I do think that was kind of awesome as well. It's a shame that show never aired a couple of years ago. If it had been 10, 15 years ago, it probably would have been the prime era for it. But hey, it could have survived 5 years ago, 6 years ago. So everything's changing now, and it's difficult to say. It does feel like we kind of went on a bit of a greatest hits tour before it died out, because of course
It's
the
true.
Flash, the Flash was one of the shows that started this era, and it only just recently ended. So of course it got to be part of that final chapter. Gotham Knights was kind of like an odd, original Gotham kind of take on Smallville, and it got to bow out this era as well. But of course, the big one was Superman. Superman started this era, and Superman gets to close it out. So it's awesome that we get to close out on that end with Superman and Lois. But as the fan in me who grew up during this era, I'm still burned by the fact that it has to end because nothing lasts forever. But I feel like this era could have had another 2, 3, maybe even 4 years left in it.
I think so too. And I think that because there's, in some ways, more time to grow
Yeah.
on as a broadcast show, simply sometimes just because they have more episodes. Like because the budgets are so big for the streaming shows, they've got to tell a complete story in minimum 6, maximum 10, usually. I think there's like, I don't think there are any 13 episode live action superhero shows, are there? On streaming. In this era, not the Netflix one's even 13 episodes? I don't think so.
I think some of them, the early ones were, and then after the Defenders, didn't some of them go to 8 then instead, I think.
Okay. Hmm.
Yeah. You're right. 13 used to be the general number for smaller TV shows and even streaming TV shows. Whereas you're right, now nothing seems to go past 8, 9, or 10.
And there's no room for growth there. I'm not even just talking about the writers growing, because that's the other thing. I think like the end of superhero TV on broadcast also means that everybody has to be tight now.
Yeah.
You have to know where you're going and how you're going to get there immediately, and you have to hook the audience immediately. And I think that is it's not how writing works.
Mm-mm.
Like there's not. I mean, there are some fantastic talented writers, but a lot of the times it's you start the show with this premise and your actors push you past it. And you start going in slightly different directions, maybe even major different directions. And having 22 episodes or even 18 helps you do that better than Disney, or Max being like, okay, we're giving you a smooth 8. Like you need to track this arc, and also we need you. and I think DC's gonna start doing this because they have the DCU now. Um, we need you to seed these five plot points for these other shows and movies that are coming, while still
Yeah.
maintaining your story and what you need to say. And also, if this is an unlimited series, so leave it open for season two, but not so much so, just in case we cancel you.
Yeah. Like, how do you take all of that and how do you juggle all of that when you're trying to make a TV show?
It's a question. Like, I mean, obviously they're doing it, but I just feel like there's a freedom to television that broadcast has or did have, that streaming just does not. Like it is streaming is all your eggs in the basket go.
Yeah, it
And
really is.
broadcast lets you breathe a bit more. Obviously, there are broadcast shows that got canceled after a season. But like, and there are broadcast shows that were pulled off of TV, off of television after six episodes. Like we do remember that era. But for the most part, you had to live and breathe for the like 22 and like hope you could make it better. And I think also because of the way the writers' rooms work, you were writing as people were reacting to. That's not happening as much
Hmm.
anymore. Generally, the writers' room is closed. So if anything made you angry, we cannot fix it.
Yeah,
Like
right.
it's there's just nothing they can, so they just have to swallow the scandal and the controversy when they could have course corrected. I mean, that's a completely different conversation about the way that TV writing has changed immensely in the past 2 decades. But like there's just, I mean, it has affected the way that superheroes are perceived too. It's
Yeah.
affected the way that genre fiction is perceived, which genre fiction is not celebrated outside of those of us who love it. That's why it
Hmm.
doesn't get awards. I mean, I'm making my way through Interview with a Vampire, and Sam Reed deserves an Emmy. I'm not even sure he's ever been nominated, but he deserves an Emmy for the role of the stat. He probably will not get one because the show is about vampires.
That's always frustrated me. Always. I watched The Walking Dead. I love The Walking Dead. Melissa McBride, who played Carol, that character has had one of the greatest examples of character development over the course of a TV show ever. Everyone's instant she's going to die in the first season character ended up evolving into one of the most badass, brutal survivors of the lot. And now she's still on her screens and among the spin-offs. That woman deserved 5 Emmy nominations at least throughout her time on the show, and that show got ignored because it was genre. And in its peak, it was considered one of the very best shows on TV. Like everything, it fell off at some point, but like the writing was of such a strong level. Genre fiction ignored, and yet now The Last of Us is getting Emmys left, right, and Emmy nominations left, right, and center. So because of this streaming brand, shows that were on TV because they're on streaming suddenly. Of course, The Last of Us is very well written. That's not the point. But the fact of the matter is, now they're getting attention. Now they're getting noticed. And don't get me wrong, that's great. But it's all, like you said, that's part of a larger conversation and the pivot away from general broadcast and that all award ceremonies only tend to award streaming shows now. But it's the superhero and comic book genre shifting into streaming is definitely part of that because now they're getting a bit more notice. They never win, but they're getting a bit more notice. And like you said, generally they don't, which is just a shame because, like, look at all the great shows of generations gone by that never got the attention they deserved.
And some of them were on the CW. Just to
You're
put it
right.
out there, just to say it, because it's very true. Before we wrap about this though, I think of with the new crop that's coming up, the Penguin's probably going to get awards. We haven't seen a look of it
Yeah.
yet, but it's on HBO and Colin Farrell is the lead. Like it's
Hmm.
just some of the ways that this works is like well-known actors in genre fiction just do get awarded for their performances. And it's not to say it's not deserved. That's not, it's just as fans of genre fiction, sometimes it can be aggravating that like when you have been watching something that has been darn near perfect, or at least the acting has been, and you know they deserve it and they don't get it because it's genre, and then another genre show that has is on a big cable network gets it, and you're like, I love that. I'm rooting for them. I hope they win. But at the same time, I wish this person was also nominated in this category because they deserve it. I mean, like for instance, like you said with The Last of Us, deserved,
Without a
deserved.
doubt.
But it is also uh I mean, I haven't watched The Walking Dead, so I cannot say with boldness and confidence that The Last of Us is better written. It feels better written from what I've seen of the different clips of The Walking Dead, but that's not necessarily true. I just haven't seen it. But there I do know, I'm sure people who enjoy zombies are just like The Last of Us should be awarded, but y'all have ignored these shows over here that did zombie content too. And The Last of Us has an HBO budget, so it gets more respect. Like, that's not fair.
Hmm.
Um, and I just it's unfortunate. Like I am in some ways, Michael, excited to see the award era for like DC now that it's gonna be living on streaming. Like, is the Academy gonna come out now that, these are gonna be on HBO and us in the trenches fighting in some ways because the idea like, oh, this is the best like superhero-esque genre show, like the comics show that we've seen, and the rest of us are like, no, you're new. It's really good, but it is up there. But let us talk about this, and this first. Do you want to talk animated? Or do you want to talk live action? Because it's a completely different conversation, y'all. But like, it is going to be interesting to see the penguin be the gateway for some people and whether someone is going to boldly claim it's the best thing they've ever seen in terms of this type of fiction.
Right. I know it's fun, it's great for the genre, like you said, but like you and me have the knowledge. We were there. I don't think we'll ever see a better era of superhero TV than 2016 when obviously the Arrowverse shows were thriving at that point, but because they were thriving, other networks were trying things. You had Agent Carter and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. on ABC, both to entirely different lengths. Agent Carter was like between 8 to 10 episodes. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. ran for full seasons. Then NBC tried its hand with that perilous sitcom. It only lasted one season, but it tried. Um, Obviously, then you had the shows on the CW, and Supergirl premiered on CBS. We had a superhero show on CBS that was getting 13 million viewers in 2015 and 2016. Obviously, it was too expensive to sustain, so they had to move it home to the CW. But like seeing superheroes everywhere on network broadcast TV during that era was so fulfilling. And it's a shame, obviously, now that we're about to say goodbye to the last one, but it is an exciting turning point. It's going to be even more exciting, like you said, to see DC finally make the jump to streaming after living in both worlds for a little while. It's going to be interesting to see now that Marvel's tightening up things, how strong the shows are going forward. With the success of The Boys and Invincible, and now the shows, animated shows like Batman Caped Crusader, streaming is becoming the home for superhero content. And as much as I'm trying to drag my feet, it's a realization. And as a fan of the genre, I'm excited to see where it goes next. We had an incredible decade with the Arrowverse leading the charge, but it's going to be fun to see where it goes next.
Yes, and to whoever is potentially listening or watching who is writing the book about superhero TV, we wish you luck with this journey
Yes.
because someone is definitely being a superhero TV historian right now and
Hmm.
writing about the close of this era. And we cannot wait to see your book appear. Whoever you are out
Yeah,
there, if you're in the middle of writing it, or if you are about to send your manuscript in, good luck to you.
definitely. Send us free copies and we'll review it.
Yeah, we would. The biggest nerds, we would definitely review it. But oh, one last plug, and this is not for us. It is for Gotham. If you watch The Penguin and you want to watch another DC show, that's like it, watch Gotham.
Yes, I forgot to mention that Gotham was on Fox during that peak era as well. Listen, you won't find a more outlandish, fun, um, personification of what the genre is capable of. And by this genre, I mean television and superheroes than Gotham. A beautiful marriage of absolute ridiculousness and five outlandish and off the wall seasons. Honestly, you'll get your whole life.
Yes, and that the I think the best arc for me is the Joker arc. It's just
Incredible.
fantastic. But we'll end it here, y'all, because we will end up spending like a full hour, another hour, actually, talking about this. So thank you for listening and watching Where the CW Spiral. I'm Sabrina.
And I'm Michael.
Bye, y'all.